snow made the frontier town look clean, but it did nothing to soften the way people watched a hungry woman like they were counting her sins. Lian Hua stood beneath a sagging awning where the wind could not decide whether to leave her alone or peel her skin raw, and she held her hands together as if she could warm them through stubbornness. She was 25, a beautiful Chinese widow in a light pink traditional cheongsam that had once been a promise of celebration, and now clung to her body like a memory that refused to die. The fabric was thin for this kind of cold, and every gust found the seams, slipped through, and turned her bones to glass. Church bells rang somewhere behind the buildings, bright and festive, and the sound only made the silence around her feel meaner. She watched families hurry past with parcels and ribbon, watched men in thick coats laugh as if laughter was a resource they would never run out of, and she tried to keep her face calm so no one could say she looked desperate. Her stomach argued in small sharp waves, and her pride argued back, and the fight made her dizzy. "Merry Christmas," a woman said without looking at her, the words thrown like crumbs to birds. Lian Hua swallowed, counted the coins in her pocket with a thumb that could barely move, and did the painful arithmetic again. 1 copper for bread that would not last. 2 coins for a room so cold it would still feel like the street. No money for coal, no money for medicine, and no money left for mistakes. She kept her eyes down because looking into faces made her feel the shape of judgment more clearly, and she had already felt enough judgment to last a lifetime. A small sound cut through the wind, the light clink of metal meeting frozen ground, and Lian Hua looked down to see a coin spinning at her feet like a tiny sun trying to keep itself alive. Her hand moved before her mind could lecture her, because hunger has its own laws, and she reached for it with fingers that shook. "Don't," someone said, not loudly, but with the kind of calm that stopped motion the way a gate stops a horse. Lian Hua froze with her knuckles inches above the snow. She followed the voice upward, and the man standing there looked like he belonged to the weather itself, tall and broad-shouldered, with a worn coat dusted white and a scarf pulled high to cut the wind. His eyes were steady, the color of Winter Creek water, and his face held a quiet hardness that did not feel cruel, only practiced. "It's yours?" Lian Hua whispered, because she assumed the coin had come from him, and she could not afford another accusation. The man's gaze did not leave her hand or the coin, and when he spoke again, his words were precise, like he measured each one before letting it go. "It's not mine," he said, "and it didn't fall. Someone tossed it." Lian Hua's throat tightened as if the air itself had grown sharp. She glanced toward the street and saw a young man a few paces away, smirking behind his mittens, watching her like she was entertainment. The shame rose fast, hot against the cold, and she pulled her hand back as if the coin had burned her. The stranger stepped closer, putting his body between her and the laughter without making a show of it, and he looked at the young man with the kind of stillness that made mockery feel stupid. "Find your mother?" the stranger said, voice quiet and flat. "And tell her she raised a fool." The young man's smirk faltered, then vanished, and he turned away with a muttered curse swallowed by the wind. Lian Hua stood there shaking, not from cold alone now, and the stranger bent down, picked up the coin, and set it in her palm as if placing something sacred. "That was meant to make you beg," he said. "You don't have to." Lian Hua's eyes stung, and she hated that tears could freeze and betray her. "I don't want charity," she managed, because dignity was the last thing she owned outright. The man nodded once as if he respected the rule. "Then don't take charity," he replied. "Take work." His name, when he finally offered it, came like an afterthought that still mattered. "Caleb Hart," he said. "I've got a ranch a day's ride out. I need help with the house." Lian Hua stared at him, measuring danger the way she measured coins. "Why would you ask me?" she whispered. When everyone else sees trouble, Caleb's eyes softened in a way that did not feel like pity. "Because trouble doesn't stand in the cold that long," he said. "Only someone trying to survive does." The offer changed her options so abruptly that her mind resisted it like a door resisting a storm. Lian Hua followed Caleb to a small feed store where the air smelled of hay and animal sweat, and she watched him pay for supplies without looking over his shoulder like he feared someone's opinion. He bought flour, beans, salt, a small sack of coal, and a thick wool shawl that he held out to her with the same plain seriousness he used for everything else. "Wear it," he said. "It's not a gift. It's a tool." Lien Hua hesitated, because accepting warmth from a stranger felt like stepping onto ice that might crack, but the wind had already carved her down to exhaustion. She took the shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders, and the heat that arrived was so immediate it made her knees weak. Caleb noticed the tremble in her legs, and he shifted closer as if ready to catch her without making her feel caught. "You've eaten today," he said, and it was not a question. Lien Hua's lips parted, then closed, because lying took energy she did not have. "No," she admitted. Caleb's jaw tightened once, and he turned to the shopkeeper. "2 bowls of stew," he said. Hot. When the food arrived, Lien Hua tried to eat slowly so she would not look wild, but her body refused manners and drank the heat like a dying fire. Caleb ate less than she did, watching the door more than his spoon, and she wondered what kind of loneliness made a man sit so guarded on a holiday. "There will be rules," he said after a moment, as if he could hear her thoughts scraping. "You'll have your own room. You'll be paid. You'll do work that keeps the house running. I won't touch you, and you won't owe me anything outside the job." Lien Hua's throat tightened, and relief came so hard it almost hurt. "Why are you saying that?" she asked, voice low, because she had learned what men sometimes expected when they offered safety. Caleb met her gaze directly. "Because I don't want you afraid of me," he said. "Fear makes people do desperate things." Lien Hua held the spoon still and felt something unfamiliar press against her ribs. Something like hope, but sharper, because hope always came with risk. "And if I want to leave?" she asked, testing the boundary like a finger testing a blade. Caleb nodded, as if the answer should belong to her. "Then you leave," he said. "No chase. No debt. No punishment." She looked down at her hands, saw the pink cheongsam beneath the shawl, and wondered if she could still be a person with choices instead of a body being moved by circumstances. "I can work," she said, voice steadier now. "I can cook, sew, clean, and I learn fast." Caleb's mouth twitched as if he almost smiled but decided against it. "Good," he said. "Then we start tonight. You'll ride out with me before the next storm hits." Outside, the sky had that bruised color that promised more snow, and the town's holiday cheer felt far away already, like music from another life. They left the town with a small wagon and a single steady horse, and Lien Hua sat beside Caleb with her shawl pulled tight and her hands tucked under it, trying to keep warmth where warmth still mattered. The prairie stretched wide and pale, and the wind chased them as if it wanted to push them back into the judgment they were leaving behind. Caleb drove with quiet competence, his gloved hands sure on the reins, and the only sound for long stretches was the creak of wood and the soft crunch of hooves over packed snow. Lien Hua tried to watch for landmarks the way she watched for exits in any new room, because safety was never real unless she knew how to leave it. "How far is your ranch?" she asked, voice nearly stolen by the wind. 8 miles, Caleb answered. "Maybe 9 if the drifts force us around." Lien Hua did the arithmetic automatically, counting miles like coins, and she wondered what 8 miles looked like when you were running for your life. The cold bit at her cheeks, but the shawl held, and she found herself studying Caleb's profile, the way his eyes stayed on the horizon, the way his shoulders remained tense even when the road looked empty. He carried something heavy inside him, and she recognized that weight because she carried her own. A flock of crows lifted from a fence post and spiraled into the sky, black against white, and the sight made Lien Hua shiver with an old superstition she did not fully believe but still respected. "Do you live alone?" she asked, because the quiet around him felt too complete. "Yes," Caleb said after a pause. "It's been that way for a while." His voice did not invite questions, but it did not forbid them either, and Lien Hua decided not to pry. She had learned that pain often needed permission before it could speak. When the ranch finally appeared, it rose out of the snow like something stubborn that refused to be erased. A small house with a low roof, a barn set back behind it, and fences half buried by drifts. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin but steady, and that small ribbon of gray felt like a miracle. Caleb guided the wagon into the yard, jumped down, and offered his hand to help her. Lien Hua hesitated only a heartbeat before placing her fingers in his palm, and the contact was brief, careful, but it sent a strange warmth up her arm that had nothing to do with the fire inside. Caleb released her quickly, as if aware of the power of even a simple touch, and he opened the door to the house. Heat rolled out, carrying the smell of wood smoke and something clean and plain, and Lien Hua nearly cried again from the relief of it. "You'll sleep in the back room," Caleb said, leading her down a narrow hall. "There's a lock on the inside. Use it if it helps you rest." Lien Hua stopped and looked at him, because offering a lock felt like offering trust without demanding any in return. "Thank you," she said, and the words came out small but real. Caleb's gaze flicked to her face, then away, like he did not know how to accept gratitude. "You can start with the kettle," he said instead. "Water first, then food." Lien Hua nodded, understanding the language of practical care. She set her small bundle on the bed, smoothed her cheongsam automatically as if fabric could steady her nerves, and then moved to the kitchen where the iron stove waited like an altar. She filled the kettle, set it on the heat, and began to work, because work was the only thing that had ever kept her upright when the world tried to bend her into something smaller. The first night held a quiet tension, not the threat of violence, but the unfamiliar weight of safety that still did not feel earned. Lien Hua warmed leftover stew Caleb had stored, and they ate at a rough wooden table without candles or decorations, because Caleb's house did not pretend to celebrate what it could not afford emotionally. The storm pressed against the windows, and the sound of it made the room feel like a shelter and a trap at the same time. Lien Hua kept her posture straight, her movements precise, because she wanted to prove she belonged here on merit, not pity. Caleb spoke little, but when he did, he spoke with the same careful clarity he had shown in town. "You'll be paid each week," he said. $1 and meals. If you can read, there are records you can help with. If you can't, we'll keep it simple." Lien Hua looked up, surprised. "I can read," she said quietly. "Chinese and some English." Caleb's eyebrows lifted a fraction. "Good," he replied. "Then you'll help me keep the ledger. I'm not quick with numbers when my head is full." Lien Hua almost smiled, because the admission sounded like a man confessing weakness without shame. "Numbers are honest," she said. "People are harder." Caleb's mouth softened at that, and for the first time his eyes held something like agreement and respect at the same time. "That's true," he said. Silence settled again, but it was not hostile, only cautious, like a skittish animal deciding whether to stay. Later, when the dishes were done, Caleb stopped at the hall and kept his hands visible at his sides, as if reminding her of his promise through posture alone. "I'll be in the front room," he said. "You lock your door if you want." Lien Hua's chest tightened, and she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I will lock it," she said honestly. "Not because I think you will hurt me, but because my body needs the habit." Caleb nodded once, accepting the truth without offense. "That's fair," he said. "Habits kept you alive." Lien Hua stepped into her small room, closed the door, slid the lock into place, and leaned her forehead against the wood for a long moment. The bed was simple but clean, the blanket thick, and a small basin of water sat near the washstand like someone had thought ahead for her comfort. She undressed carefully, folding the light pink cheongsam with the reverence of someone folding a piece of her identity, then wrapped herself in a borrowed nightshirt she found on the bed. The fabric smelled faintly of soap and cedar, and the scent made her feel strangely safe and strangely lonely. She climbed under the blanket, listened to the wind claw the walls, and tried to sleep, but her mind kept circling the same question in different shapes. Why would a man like Caleb Hart, alone on a ranch, offer work and boundaries to a widow everyone else wanted to ignore? Somewhere in the front room, she heard the soft scrape of a chair, then the slow, steady crackle of fire, and the sounds felt like a promise made without words. Morning arrived as a dim gray light, and the storm had laid new snow like a fresh cover over every track, as if the world wanted to pretend yesterday never happened. Lien Hua woke with her muscles stiff, but she woke warm, and that alone felt like a victory. She dressed again in her light pink cheongsam, layered the wool shawl over it, and stepped out to find Caleb already up, splitting kindling with an efficiency that looked like routine, not performance. He glanced up when he saw her, then looked away quickly, but his voice held a quiet steadiness that made the house feel anchored. "Coffee's on," he said. Bread too. Lien Hua moved to the stove, poured coffee into 2 cups, and set one near him. Their hands did not touch this time, but she noticed how Caleb's shoulders eased a fraction, as if her competence removed one small burden from his mind. "Tell me what needs doing," she said, because asking felt like taking her place rather than waiting to be assigned one. Caleb wiped his hands on a cloth and nodded toward the window. "Drifts have to be cleared," he said. "Animals need feed. Then the house needs a proper sweep. If you can sew, there's a tear in a blanket I keep meaning to fix." Lien Hua nodded, already arranging the day in her head like a list of steps across ice. "I can fix the blanket," she said. "And I can cook something better if you have supplies." Caleb's eyes flicked to her face, and something like surprise lived there. The surprise of a man not used to being cared for. "We've got beans and flour," he said. "Not much else." Lien Hua took that as a challenge, not a limitation. "Then we'll make it last," she said, and the words sounded like a vow before she meant them to. The day passed in steady work, and the work did what sermons never could, because it built a bridge without forcing either of them to admit they needed one. Lien Hua swept the floors until the boards showed their true color again, scrubbed the stove, mended the blanket with careful stitches, and hung damp cloths near the fire to dry. Caleb shoveled snow, fed the animals, checked the fence line, and came in occasionally to add wood to the stove without hovering. When he stepped inside with snow on his shoulders, Lien Hua handed him a cup of coffee without asking, and he accepted it with a small nod that felt like gratitude expressed in his language. In the late afternoon, while she kneaded dough, Caleb stood near the door and watched her hands work as if he had forgotten how ordinary domestic life could look. "Your husband," Caleb said suddenly, the words cautious, as if he feared stepping on a wound. "He died recently." Lien Hua's hands slowed, and her throat tightened, but she kept working because stopping would invite collapse. "Yes," she said, "and the town decided that made me suspicious." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Widowhood doesn't make a person guilty," he said quietly. Lien Hua gave a small bitter laugh that held no humor. "In some places it does," she replied. Caleb looked at her then, truly looked, and his eyes held anger that did not belong to him but still rose on her behalf. "Here," he said, voice low. "You work, you eat, you rest, and nobody gets to decide what you deserve based on gossip." Lien Hua felt something shift inside her, like a stone moving from one place to another, and she forced herself to keep her voice steady. "And what do you deserve?" she asked softly, because the question came before she could stop it. Caleb's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment his quiet authority looked like a man carrying grief he never unpacked. "I don't know," he admitted. "I stopped asking that a long time ago." Lien Hua watched him in silence, feeling the shape of his loneliness match the shape of her own, and when she slid the bread into the oven, she realized she wanted to feed him not just because it was work, but because she could see how little warmth he allowed himself. That night, as the bread cooled and the house filled with a smell that felt almost like celebration, Lien Hua stood by the window and watched the moonlight brighten the snowfields outside. Caleb came up behind her, stopping at a respectful distance, and his voice was quiet enough that it felt like a secret shared with the room rather than demanded from her. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll show you the barn and the storage. I'll also show you the path to the road, in case you ever need it." Lien Hua turned, surprised again by the way he offered escape as part of safety. "You really mean it," she said. "You really mean I can leave?" Caleb met her eyes, and something firm and gentle lived in his expression at once. "I mean it," he said. Lien Hua's heart beat hard, and not only from fear now, because the space between them held a strange growing tenderness, like a fire that began as survival and slowly became comfort. She hesitated, then said the truth she could finally afford to say. "I don't want to leave tonight," she whispered. Caleb's breath caught, barely, and his voice stayed controlled, but it softened around the edges. "Then don't," he replied. His hand lifted slightly, then stopped in the air as if asking permission without words. Lien Hua watched the gesture, saw restraint instead of entitlement, and she took one slow step forward until their hands brushed, the lightest contact, enough to make her skin feel awake. Caleb did not pull her closer, did not claim the moment, but his fingers curled gently around hers, warm and steady, and the intimacy of that simple hold made her eyes sting. "You're safe here," he said, the word spoken like a promise he intended to keep even if it cost him something. Lien Hua swallowed, held his hand a little tighter, and felt the storm outside fade into background noise. "I want to believe you," she whispered. Caleb's thumb moved once against her knuckles, careful and slow, and his gaze held hers with a quiet seriousness that felt like devotion taking its first breath. "Then we'll build it," he said. "One day, one choice, one step." The storm deepened overnight, not with violence, but with persistence, the kind that wore down defenses through hours rather than force. Wind pressed against the house like a living thing testing boundaries, and the sound of it seeped into Lien Hua's dreams until she woke with her heart racing and her breath caught halfway between panic and memory. For a moment she did not know where she was, only that the dark felt heavy and the cold felt remembered rather than present. Then she smelled with smoke, steady and warm, and she heard the low murmur of a man's voice from the front room, not speaking words, just making sound as if reminding the world he was awake and watching. Lien Hua sat up slowly, wrapping the blanket around herself, and listened until her pulse settled into something manageable. She dressed, smoothing the pink cheongsam as she always did, because the ritual grounded her, then opened her door and stepped into the hall. The house was dim, lit only by the stove's low glow, and Caleb sat at the table with his coat still on, mending a strap with thick thread and practiced hands. He looked up when he heard her, immediately alert, then softened when he saw her standing there, small and wrapped in borrowed warmth. "Did I wake you?" he asked, voice quiet and careful. Lien Hua shook her head. "The wind did," she said. Caleb nodded, as if he understood storms as something more than weather. He set the strap aside and stood, keeping space between them even as concern pulled him closer. "It's bad out there," he said. "Roads gone. We're snowed in until morning at least." Lien Hua felt fear flicker, then fade, because isolation here felt different than isolation in town. "That's all right," she said after a moment. "I don't feel trapped." Caleb watched her closely, as if the statement mattered more than the situation itself. "If you do," he said, "you tell me." Lien Hua nodded, and something unspoken settled between them like an agreement signed without ink. They moved through the night together without naming what they were doing, sharing small tasks because shared work made the hours feel less long. Lien Hua put more wood on the fire while Caleb checked the windows, reinforcing shutters with quiet efficiency. When she handed him a mug of reheated coffee, their fingers brushed again, and this time neither of them pulled away immediately. The contact was still, deliberate, and the heat of his skin traveled up her arm in a way that made her breath hitch. Caleb noticed, of course, because he noticed everything, and his jaw tightened as if he were choosing restraint over instinct. "You should sit," he said gently. "You look tired." Lien Hua obeyed, settling onto the bench near the stove, and Caleb joined her a moment later, sitting close enough that she could feel the warmth of him without being touched. The fire cracked softly, and the storm howled outside, and the world narrowed to the space they shared. "I haven't been close to anyone in a long time," Lien Hua said quietly, the confession slipping out because the night felt honest. Caleb's shoulders stiffened, then eased. "Neither have I," he replied. She glanced at him, surprised by the simplicity of the admission. "Why?" she asked, not accusing, just curious. Caleb stared into the fire as if it held answers he was still negotiating with. "Because everyone I loved," he said slowly, "either left or died, and I decided the safest way to keep breathing was to stop reaching." Lien Hua felt the truth of that settle into her bones, because she had made similar calculations herself. "Safety can be lonely," she said. Caleb turned to her then, his gaze steady but raw. "Yes," he agreed. Silence followed, heavy but not empty, and in that silence Lien Hua felt something fragile forming, like trust stretching its limbs after a long confinement. As the hours passed, fatigue softened the sharp edges of their restraint, and the bench felt colder than the space beside Caleb. Lien Hua shifted closer, not asking, just moving slowly enough that he could stop her if he needed to. He did not stop her. Their shoulders touched, then stayed touching, and the simple contact felt more intimate than anything she remembered from before her loss, because it carried choice rather than obligation. Caleb's breathing changed, just slightly, and his voice came low and steady. "If this feels like too much," he said. "We stop," Lien Hua nodded, her head brushing his arm. "If it feels like too much," she replied. "I will say so." The agreement sat between them like a third presence, something that made the closeness safer rather than heavier. Lien Hua rested her head against his shoulder, tentatively at first, then fully, and Caleb's body responded with a careful stillness that told her he was holding himself in check. She could feel his heart through his coat, steady and strong, and the rhythm of it soothed something inside her that had been fractured for months. "You smell like cedar," she murmured without thinking. Caleb huffed a quiet sound that might have been a laugh if he allowed himself one. "That's the soap," he said. And the barn. Lien Hua smiled, a small real smile that surprised her with its ease. "It's a good smell," she said. Caleb's arm lifted, slow and deliberate, giving her time to pull away if she wished, then settled around her shoulders, not pulling her closer, just enclosing space so the cold could not reach her. The gesture felt protective without being possessive, and Lien Hua closed her eyes, letting herself rest. Morning came pale and quiet, the storm spent, leaving the world muffled and new. Lien Hua woke on the bench with her cheek against Caleb's shoulder, his arm still around her, and the realization did not bring panic. Instead it brought a warmth that spread slowly, carefully, as if afraid to startle her. She lifted her head slightly, and Caleb stirred, blinking awake, his eyes immediately finding her face. For a moment neither of them spoke, the closeness charged with awareness, and Lien Hua felt the urge to apologize rise out of habit. She stopped it before it reached her lips. "Good morning," she said instead. Caleb's mouth curved, almost imperceptibly, but enough that it felt like a gift. "Good morning," he replied. He did not move his arm right away, and she did not ask him to, and the silence between them felt companionable rather than strained. Eventually, Caleb shifted, careful not to jostle her. "I should make breakfast," he said, practicality returning like a familiar coat. Lien Hua sat up, the loss of contact noticeable now, and nodded. "I'll help," she said. They stood together at the stove, shoulders brushing again, and this time the contact felt intentional rather than accidental. When Caleb reached past her for the kettle, his hand hovered at her waist for a second longer than necessary, not touching, just acknowledging the space, and Lien Hua's breath caught. She turned to face him, heart pounding, and met his gaze. "Caleb," she said softly. He stilled, every line of his body attentive. "I don't want to pretend this is only work anymore," she continued, voice steady despite the fear curling underneath. "I don't know what it will become, but I know how it feels to stand beside you, and I don't want to lie about that." Caleb swallowed, his jaw working as if the words were heavier than any load he had carried. "I won't take anything you don't choose," he said quietly. Lien Hua reached out then, her fingers touching his coat at his chest, feeling the solid truth of him beneath. "I am choosing," she said. The kiss that followed was slow and careful, more question than claim, their lips meeting briefly, then parting, then meeting again with a little more confidence. Caleb's hand came to her face, warm and steady, his thumb brushing her cheek as if memorizing the shape of it. Lien Hua leaned into the touch, her heart opening in a way that felt terrifying and right at the same time. When they finally pulled back, foreheads resting together, the world felt quieter, as if it were holding its breath for them. "We'll go at your pace," Caleb murmured. Lien Hua smiled, tears bright in her eyes but not falling. "Our pace," she corrected gently. Caleb nodded, a deeper smile finally breaking through. And in that moment the ranch, the storm, and the long road behind her all aligned into something that felt like a future she could step into without fear.